is delighted to organize this fourth policy dialogue here in Kuala Lumpur. It's all about quality. We have around 160 government officials, university representatives, and student representatives with us today. And what combines them all is their understanding and their commitment to raising the quality of higher education in the region.
By involving students in the shared policy dialogue itself has always been something very essential, especially when student is the beneficiary and a major stakeholder when it comes to higher education.
Quality assurance is a main contribution also to the aim that you would like to have higher education systems converge and harmonize.
ASEAN integration is all about future, and the future we're talking about young students, the youth, the up and coming generation, because they will form the large part of the workforce of ASEAN, the engine of growth of ASEAN.
I believe that the EU Share is a timely project, because we had the instrument, the guidelines ready, but we didn't have the right instruments fully developed to be able to share it with all the stakeholders, and to be able that one day we hope that we are able to implement, and so that all quality assurance body can be enhanced and play their effective role in their own national state. So.
Good afternoon to our ASEAN viewers, good morning to Europe, and an equally warm greeting to everybody who is watching from other parts of the world. I want to welcome you all to the 11th EU-ASEAN Policy Dialogue organized by the SHARE program since its inauguration in 2015. We have come a long way since then in the creation of a common zone of trust in higher education in ASEAN, and we're looking forward to the years to come. Today is our final session of this policy dialogue, and I hope you enjoyed these so far. Allow me now to tell you a bit more about SHARE and our work in ASEAN. Next slide, please. SHARE stands for the European Union Support to Higher Education in the ASEAN region. Our program's main objective is to strengthen regional cooperation, enhance the quality, competitiveness, and internationalization of ASEAN higher education systems, institutions, thereby contributing to the evolving ASEAN community. SHARE also enhances cooperation between ASEAN and the European Union to create lasting benefits from the harmonization of higher education across ASEAN. Please, the next slide. The EU Share project is implemented by a consortium of European international education agencies responsible for the result areas of policy dialogue, which is led by our colleagues from the British Council, qualifications, frameworks, and quality assurance, the topic of today, led by our friends from DAAD and ENQA in Europe, and credit transfer system, also led by the British Council, student mobility, last but not least, and the Share scholarship, led by our Dutch friends, NUFIC. The objective for this policy dialogue are to propose measures to ensure the scalability of SHARE's activities and sustainability of ownership by ASEAN-based entities, and also to assess the challenge of COVID-19 and to formulate effective adaptation strategies. We also want to identify emerging developments and innovations in higher education of relevance to ASEAN. We also want to envisage a long-term perspectives for the development of an ASEAN higher education space, as it is mentioned in the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on Higher Education. The objectives of this session are to provide an overview of good practices on the topic of quality assurance of distance and online learning from both Europe and Southeast Asia, and also to highlight challenges and opportunities prevalent in Southeast Asia related to the aforementioned topic. I want to highlight here that we have a case study of the Philippines for this. Now, without any further ado, please allow me to introduce our honorable chair for this session, Dr. Hasman Shah Abdullah. He was a professor of administrative sciences at the University Technology Mara in Malaysia until his retirement in 2018. During his university tenure, he served as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Quality Assurance. Later on, Dr. Hasman was seconded to the Malaysian Qualifications Agency, better known as MQA, as the Deputy Chief Executive Officer for Quality Assurance from 2015 until 2018. He also later served as a quality assurance expert at MQA until February this year. He has participated in many international QA agencies, university and program reviews, and training under the auspices of the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Asia Pacific Quality Network, better known as APQN, of course the EU Share Consortium, and last but not least, and most importantly, the ASEAN Quality Assurance Network, also known as ACAN. He continues, as you will see, to be active in the assessment, development of standards and training of assessors and reviewers in ASEAN, but also beyond. Dr. Hasman, please, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Sebastian. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever time zone you are dialing in. My name is Hasman Shah Abdullah, and I have this privilege of moderating the last edition of the 11th Share Policy Dialogue webinar series on a topic that I think is extremely relevant and timely: quality standards for online distance higher education. We are indeed living in troubled times, or you might say disrupted times. The COVID pandemic has forced changes in all aspects of our life, including and especially higher education. In most countries, including Southeast Asia, the teaching and learning has continued online despite the many challenges. A recent AACSB 2020 survey on the COVID response by institutions indicated that about half the respondents or the institutions have switched to online teaching, with Middle East and the Oceanic countries reporting well above 80% adoption of e-learning. Obviously, for the switch to online learning has allowed continuity of e-learning for vast majority of the college in the world. As the public health emergency is somewhat winding down and the gradual return to college looks imminent, there are loud calls for higher education to embrace the new normal. Online learning in a much more extensive manner, whether as part of blended learning or to fully transform the in-campus face-to-face studies to the distance learning mode. Obviously, many universities and colleges, the onlining of classes was not a planned event, even though these institutions have started their respective journeys onto online teaching and learning. They did rush out of necessity and learn from their own and also others' experience to improve the learning experience of the students as they went along. Now, quality and quality assurance in many cases took a back seat, at least for the moment, or at least during the interim period. But eventually, quality and quality assurance has to rise to the fore if online learning is to be really a valued mode of delivery in terms of effective education. So the question is, how should institutions approach this transformation to ensure high quality experience for the learners? Fortunately for us, standards have already been developed for online and also distance learning, which can be a valuable guide to institutions, that is higher education institutions, and also for quality assurance agencies. And on this, today we have three eminent speakers who will provide guidance to institutions in navigating this new terrain, whether you are a QA body or you're an educational institution. Now we have Esther Huertas Hidalgo, who is the head of quality assurance, Catalan University Quality Assurance Agency based in Spain, Barcelona, Spain. And she will speak on the ANCA project to develop standards for online and distance education, and on a related e-assessment project and tool that she was part of, or in fact headed the team to develop. And we have Mr. Johnson Ong, who is the ASEAN University Network quality assurance expert based in Singapore, and he will be showcasing a framework with indicators which can help frame the quality assurance actions for the institutions and also for quality assurance body. And the third speaker, Mr. Ricardo R. Parlo, is the Executive Director of Philippines Accrediting Association of Schools, Colleges and Universities, or in short, PASCU, from Philippines, who will outline the challenges faced by a private quality assurance agency in facing this pandemic. Now, each speaker will be taking about 15 to 20 minutes to present. And for the participants, please note your questions, your observations to the speaker through the comments function on the YouTube display that you see. And we will capture as many questions as possible and post it to the speakers so that we can get responses from them. And with that, I have the pleasure of calling upon Esther. Esther, will you do the honors as the first speaker?
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hasman, for this nice presentation, and I'm very honored to be here with all of you today and share with you the experience of quality assurance at the European level. So, okay, we can begin with the presentation. Thanks a lot. So the presentation of today will focus on two main elements. The quality assurance framework taking into consideration the European standards and guidelines. And then I will focus on a specific element, which is the e-assessment and the quality assurance elements that should be taken into account. In this case, I will explain a little bit of this European project, the TESLA project that we were working a lot. Okay, so next slide, please. Nowadays, our society is living in the digital age, and this can be explained through two main reasons, the globalization and the easy access to internet. And both elements have also impacted into higher education system, causing some changes in the teaching and learning processes and the universities themselves. Next one, please. It is worth mentioning that e-learning can play an important role in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is quality education, and it says, which is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And in relation with the European context, it is important to present or to say that Paris Communiqué, that it was published in 2018, introduces the concept of digital and blended learning. Next slide. And not only the introduction of this concept, but also that includes the quality assurance of this type provision, and that was something important. Next one, please. But before moving forward, I would like to introduce a new concept, the emergency remote teaching. It is important to differentiate the situation of higher education system before and after the health crisis caused by COVID-19. Nowadays, as Dr. Hasman has already explained, higher education institutions needed to adapt the teaching and learning process very quickly. Well, some authors have introduced this new concept that the previous one, sorry, this new concept that which should be understood as a temporary shift of instructional delivery and the return to the format, to the previous format once the crisis or the emergency has abated. Well, this presentation is going to focus on those scenarios where e-assessment is designed without an emergency like this one. Next one, please. When we think about quality in e-learning, the first question that raises when people think about this is linked to the equivalence between online education and traditional education. When we think about equivalent, we are not saying that both educations are the same, but the learning outcomes should be equivalent, and that's something really important. When we are talking about that those studies or those programs are equivalent, we are saying that they've got the same quality. So they should have the same recognition. And it is also important to say that good online education, it is not so different of the good face-to-face education. So next one, please. At ENQA level, the European Quality Assurance Network decided to launch a working group in 1916 in order to analyze the European standards and guidelines from the online perspective. But before presenting this report, the main ideas, it is important to explain what are the European standards and guidelines, because the standards are generic, so they provide this framework and common basic to all national context and all and different institutional activities or different profiles of higher education institutions. They also apply to all higher education offer in the European higher education area. So we are referring to the transnational education, e-learning, etc. And they apply to all the phases included in the learning process. So we are also talking about the e-assessment. Next one, please. So European standards and guidelines was the backbone of this work, and the first conclusion of this working group was that all the standards were fully applicable to e-learning provision. Something that is really important to bear in mind is that this analysis provides recommendations to quality assurance agencies and also higher education institutions. So it was a common understanding. Next one, please. But which are the most challenging standards? So if we focus in the internal quality assurance, next slide, please. This slide shows all of them, but I'm going to focus to those ones which are marked with an asterisk. Next one. Well, the first one is related to policy for quality assurance. It is important that institutions analyze their internal strategy in order to see if the e-learning is embedded in the overall strategy or if it's necessary to adapt it. Another important thing is to analyze and review the ethical and legal considerations. You have to bear in mind that in e-learning, students can share personal data, so that's something important. And the ethical and legal considerations changes very quickly, so that's something that should be updated constantly. Another challenge is the stakeholders' involvement due to the lack of an on-campus. So that's another important thing, and institutions should be aware and should think which is the best way to involve them. The next standard, which is the student-centered learning, teaching, and assessment, is, well, this standard encourages the use of flexible learning paths, different modes of delivery, a variety of pedagogical methods, and giving a sense of autonomy to each student. So that's why this is one of the most important standards. Since digitizing content alone does not lead automatically to a successful educational setting, institutions may wish to design their curriculum in such a way so as to stimulate and engage students in the learning process and to reflect best practice and research in teaching and learning. Something important in this standard here is also the assessment. An institution should include some instrument or tools in order to guarantee the authentication and authorship of those quizzes, essays, or whatever. It is also suggested to include some online discussions groups in order to have contact in between students and also to permit these sharing experiences, but also in between teachers and students. Learning materials is something important. They should, well, institutions should provide those materials to students and they should be updated. Next one, please. Well, in the next standard, the most challenging aspect is the recognition element, though this element is also applicable to any type of provision. Academic recognition should be assured, and there should be the same level of recognition provided by professional bodies or employers. And if qualifications offer a warranty, higher education system can contribute to stop fraud and diploma mills. Teaching staff is a crucial element in the teaching and learning process. Institutions should define the structure, profile, and role of teaching staff. That's something different from traditional universities, so it is important to have this definition. They should be skilled and well supported, and in different elements, so in pedagogical, but also in technological requirements. And we are saying, well, it is important to provide training, and also the institution should provide support services. In these cases, coordination of teaching activity could be more complex. Next one, please. Well, moving to learning resources, here an important element is the virtual learning environment. We are talking about the Moodle, the Blackboard, the virtual campus, anything. What is really important is that this BLE should be interoperable and robust, and it should ensure the accessibility to the learning materials and to the e-assessment. The institution should be aware of the e-library, and they should provide also some training to students in order to know how to move in the e-library. Institutions can have virtual lab whenever appropriate, of course. Student support is something really important. We are talking about tutoring and pedagogical, technological, and administrative related needs should be included in this student support. Obviously, this student support should be adapted to the e-learning environment, so it won't be useful to have the same support system as in the face-to-face education. And if those elements are warranted, the institution can improve the retention rate, success, and satisfaction of students. And finally, we will have the virtual mobility that is something that is on debate right now. Finally, we've got information management that institutions will provide with data and indirect specifically adapted to e-learning. Next one, please. But let's move to the external quality assurance part. In this case, I'm going to talk about 3 of these standards. Next one, please. The first one is designing methodologies fit for purpose. In this case, quality assurance agencies will have to include the particularities I have already explained, which are included in the internal quality assurance. Agencies should design flexible processes in order to take into considerations and be aware of different and new modes of teaching and learning. So in this way, we are saying that agencies should know how to assess and review the innovation, and they should include specific criteria, indicators, guidelines, or frameworks for e-learning. When implementing the process, the self-assessment report should include an explanation of the pedagogical model and the BLE. It is suggested that institutions provide access to and navigation to the BLE. It is important that experts could go into the classroom, debate forums, teaching material, and etc. And during the site visits, this is an excellent opportunity to have a more specific examination of the technological infrastructure. And of course, there should be an interview with all stakeholders. So in this way, we are saying that if there are different roles of teaching staff, all of them should be interviewed. Next one, please. And finally, in order to have a good panel, it is important to work with experts with experience in e-learning or blended learning, and they should be trained on the specific elements of e-learning. And this is something this is something challenging for agencies. Okay, next one. So right now I'm going to move to e-assessment, and e-assessment is something important because it's extremely linked to academic integrity. Next, please. And in a way, in 2016, there was a project funded by the European Commission, the Tesla project, that identified a gap in online evaluation system because there was a lack of technologies to support authorship and authentication, and also because there was a lack of a European quality assurance framework on e-assessment. Next one, please. What it is really interesting from this project is that it covers different aspects. It covered teaching and learning process, but also the quality assurance aspects, the privacy and ethical issues, and the technological requirements. Next one. In this project, there were 18 partners, 8 different universities with different profiles, fully online universities, distance universities, and traditional universities that were moving to, they want to include some courses in an online or blended format. So that was something relevant for us. Of course, there were quality assurance bodies, research centers, and enterprises. Next one. In this project, we work with different instruments that can be classified in 3 different groups. The document analysis that were linked, those instruments are linked to authorship, and we were working with plagiarism tools and forensic analysis. Then we've got the biometrics instruments linked to authentication. Here we've got the facial recognition, voice recognition, and keystroke dynamics. And finally, we've got some security techniques related to confidence, and we worked with timestamp and digital signature. Next one. So if you are interested on how it works, this system, I recommend you to go to the website of the project, because today we don't have enough time to explain all the details, but it's interesting to see how is the setup, the student, the accept agreement of the students, the enrollment, and then how the teacher can see the results after he or she has already finished the e-assessment. Next one, please. So I'm going to focus on the quality assurance part. We publish at the end a quality assurance framework of e-assessment. It includes 8 standards that you can see that are extremely well. They've got a clear correlation with the European standards and guidelines. Next one, please. Okay, thank you. And from those standards, I would like to highlight some of the main results we obtained on some of the standards. In the first one, we realized and we observed that in Europe we've got two different scenarios. In some countries or regions, the e-assessment was not permitted, so we have to bear in mind this fact. All higher education institutions participating in the project had well-defined policies and processes for quality assurance procedures in place, and traditional universities that have recently included the blended and online provision should develop specific policies on e-learning and e-assessment. And it is also important to say that as there are new ethical and legal issues, so they need to be revised and updated. When talking about the assessment of learning, we observe a diversity of assessment methods applied in all higher education institutions, and all of them were totally aligned with the learning outcomes. In relation with authenticity and authorship, we observed that all higher education institutions were working with academic integrity issues, mainly with plagiarism instruments, but they need to define the threshold level of normal behaviors versus suspicious behavior. That's something important. And learners need to be provided with enough information to be confident enough to share personal data. Well, going to learner support, that's something really important. In general, all higher education institutions have well-defined established support mechanisms to meet all learners' needs. It is really important that learners should be provided with technical guidance. Moving to teaching staff, so they should be trained on the innovation of the pedagogical practices, including the assessment, and should receive technical training. It is also important that they should be provided with updated information, guidelines, and well-defined procedures to deal with the academic integrity and the implementation of new assessment systems. Okay, next one, please. And in general, I would like to share with you three main ideas, which are that higher education institutions in Europe are adopting new pedagogies very quickly, while quality assurance agencies are adapting in terms of giving considerations to learning. I think that we have done a lot of work, and those works I have already presented are really important to help institutions and also quality assurance agencies to have a common framework. While this work at NQAS level demonstrate that ESG are fully applicable to e-learning provision and provide this common understanding, as I have already said, and the quality of e-learning should be guaranteed as any other type of provision. And in this way, from the other side, higher education institutions should ensure also the continuous improvement. And thank you very much for your attention. It was a quickly presentation to having or giving you the main ideas, and thank you for helping me with these slides. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Esther. Right on time. There are a lot of questions that are appearing on the call function, so we will continue with the presentation for the participants from dialing in from everywhere. We'll continue with the presentation because some of the presentations might answer your questions, and then we'll still have time at the end to pose your questions to speakers. Johnson Ong from AUNQA. It's over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Asman. A very good afternoon and good morning to every one of you. Today, my topic of presentation will be about quality standards for online teaching. So I'll be covering the disrupted education, the quality framework for online learning and teaching, as well as quality indicators. First, let's take a look at the disrupted education. I think since the COVID-19, we have seen 4 waves of disruption that affected education everywhere. First is the public health disruption. We can see that up to today, we have a total of more than 9 million cases and have resulted in more than 480,000 deaths. Social disruption, social distancing become the new normal. And of course, we can see also technology disruption. We can see a rush to synchronous platform like Zoom technology, as well as economic disruption where people are out of job and they had to work from home. So let's take a look at how education has been disrupted due to this COVID-19 pandemic. First, we see that many of the students at all levels have been out of school as government imposed lockdown. A total of almost 1.38 billion students were actually out of school during the pandemic period. Now, when the student was asked how the pandemic has affected their education, especially abroad, between 48% and 62% intend to defer or delay studying abroad because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We can also see that universities have switched almost 50% of their courses online, and they were forced to do so in a very short period of time. A similar survey carried out by AACSB also showed almost similar results. Asia Pacific tend to have a higher percentage of conversion to online learning. When the student were asked how well the pandemic could have affected their study, about 60% of them agreed with universities to go online teaching. But on the other hand, close to 60% were slightly interested or not interested at all to study their degree online. So these two results seem to contradict each other. A survey by U Multirank revealed that about a third of the university offered their program online, and 2/3 of them were actually unprepared for a switch to online learning. Interestingly, if we were to examine the completion rate of MOOCs, the rate was pretty low at 3 to 6%. And we were to look at verified students, about 50% of them managed to complete the program. So in the period of pandemic, we see an important issue about quality of program offered online. So raising the quality of online education has become a necessity. And I think it's important how university can lessen this impact and how can we sustain online education during and after the pandemic period. So let me share with you the framework that I put together to help universities as well as agencies to evaluate online learning. First is about educational philosophy. Educational philosophy tells us about a set of beliefs about the role of a teacher, the purpose of education, and how students will be taught. It is important that universities need to relook at the university educational philosophy, in particular related to online education. Would education be the same, whether offline or online? Second is the program and learning outcome. It is important that the program and learning outcome align to future skills that the graduate need to have. For example, Linked Learning have identified top 5 soft skills and top 10 hard skills. And it's important for programs to be aligned to these future skills. Likewise, WEF have also carried out a survey in 2022, and most of the future skills are related to innovation. A similar survey was also made about the future skill that students need to have. And importantly, we can see some of the digital, critical thinking, creativity, technological designs are well sought after. So it is crucial that the curriculum need to be designed based on the future needs of the industry as well as the needs of the graduates. There are several elements that we need to look at in the design of online learning. First, let's take a look at learning design. The first element in learning design is about learning methods. We can see that there are different ways how individual, groups, and community can learn in helping to achieve high-order thinking skill and low-order thinking skill. The second is to create a positive learning environment. A survey was carried out by Southeast University in Nanjing during the pandemic. And these are the 10 factors that are important to motivate students to learn. And therefore, it's important in the design of learning that we need to consider the motivation of students. A similar survey was carried out by me and my colleague during an online training on self-assessment report writing. And these are the 8 success factors that the participants have identified that they are critical in designing conducive positive experience in online learning. Second is about device time. How much students should be on the device, whether it's the iPad, or whether it's on their computers, or whether on their mobile phone. A study was made by OECD and it realized that the optimum time on devices in a classroom should be greater than 60 minutes or no, or 0 at all, in order to have highest student outcome. Likewise, the optimum time for devices for homework should be 0 at all. In other words, no devices should be used for students to carry out homework for effective student learning. As we can see from the survey data, majority of them had decided to defer their international learning or going abroad. It is important how university can actually incorporate global classroom into the learning process. And therefore, we can look at how curriculum can incorporate global learning outcome, global and intercultural competences, collaborative learning, and more important, global connectivity. In learning assessment, the hybrid system of a flipped classroom provides a very good framework for online learning using asynchronous synchronous methods in helping to achieve low-order thinking skill as well as high-order thinking skill. Esther have raised earlier about academic integrity. A survey was made regarding faculty of what changes they're going to make to online training. Surprisingly, most of the changes affect academic integrity. And therefore, it is important that the university need to closely examine and install various mechanisms to ensure academic integrity. One of the cases was reported in Singapore about NUS student cheating during exam. And university had to put up various devices and mechanisms to deter cheating in online examination. The next element is technology and infrastructure. In technology, we can see there are various varieties of technology that can be used in online learning, from artificial intelligence to gamification to data. In general, there are 2 kinds of technology that can be used. One is synchronous learning and one is asynchronous learning. In synchronous learning, live streaming becomes important that provide a replacement of face-to-face discussion. However, asynchronous learning is equally important to provide offline or self-regulated learning, and therefore it complements each other, both synchronous and asynchronous learning. In terms of uses of technology, it can be used in 4 different ways as a substitution, augmentation, modification, or redefinition. And therefore, as a designer, you have to decide how you're going to use technology. The design of technology is important to aid learning. There are basically 5 different elements that we can actually measure. One is about the value. Does it meet the learning outcome of the program or the course? We have to look at desirability, usability, comfortability, as well as adaptability for user friendliness. The next element under technology and infrastructure is infrastructure, where we talk about network accessibility, connectivity, as well as reliability. A study was made in Australia about the impact of online learning on disadvantaged students. And surprisingly, most of the skill in numeracy, mathematics, reading, and English language dropped between 10 and 33%. It basically highlights the importance of accessibility, connectivity, as well as reliability of network to disadvantaged students. So university have to ensure in terms of equity as well as accessibility for all students to online learning. And last is about privacy and security. Cannot be taken for granted. It is important to have an ecosystem to support learning, from planning to teaching to assessment as well as to reflection. The last element of the framework is about support services. And in support services, the first is about faculty. It is important to provide faculty with pedagogical approaches and different design in a way that how they can revise their curriculum to fit into online teaching and learning. Likewise, assistance should be provided to faculty members as well as at the institutional level. Last but not least, about support services to students. A collaborative, holistic support for students is important to ensure the success and the completion of their study program. So in summary, this gives you a generic framework that we can actually look at to design as well as to evaluate the effectiveness of online teaching and learning. These are some of the indicators that you can actually monitor as well as measure its success. That cover all the elements in the framework. And lastly, the framework provides a complementary elements to the AUNQA program framework. With that, I thanks everyone for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnson. Very good on time. So we have heard Esther's presentation on the standards for distance education and online teaching and learning from the European side. We have also heard on the ASEAN level project that Johnson spoke about. So you have the standards being looked at. They are not dissimilar, but you can see the level of detail varies, and they certainly provide guidance to institutions and QA bodies and institutional managers in terms of looking at online teaching and learning in a much more comprehensive, systematic, strategic, serious way, rather than jumping on the bandwagon and thinking of Zooming as online and as effective form of teaching, although that is what we have done in the interim as part of the emergency response that Esther talked about. Okay, let's welcome Ricardo R. Paulo from PASCO, Philippines, and he is the executive director in charge of this agency that carries out accreditation work, private agency, and they are coping with the pandemic, both on two fronts. One is helping the institutions continue, and at the same time try to maintain the standards as much as possible. And the other side of the equation is also looking at how the QA body is coping with the online during this period and also in the post-COVID period. So Rick, over to you.
Thank you, Hazman. Greetings to all of you. My task this afternoon is to present the challenges and opportunities of assuring the quality of e-learning provisions of higher education systems, institutions in the Philippines, and how private EQAAs like PAASCU is responding to this. In the process, I hopefully can show the relevance of the ENQA paper to this response. The outline of my presentation will be as follows. Okay. I have to give a brief on PAASCU accreditation and higher education institutions in the Philippines because this will be the way by which we can look at the problem. No? Our paradigm, our response will be dependent on the nature of our association, of our situation in the country. And the heart of the presentation will be the identification of challenges, which are really opportunities, and also the responses in terms of 5 considerations. No? Paradigm, standards, processes of accreditation, the imperative to use technology in the process, and of course, the engagement of stakeholders. PAASCU, next slide please, is a 63-year-old accrediting agency founded by the initiative of 11 private schools who wanted as peers to conduct quality audit of their respective academic programs. It is a response at the time to the lack of quality audit by the then Bureau of Education and Culture. That was 1957. Being a privately initiated association, PAASCU's philosophy of accreditation is voluntary. That is, the responsibility for quality initiatives come from the higher educational institutions themselves. That accreditation's purpose is not merely compliance to a set of standards developed externally, but a process that helps schools achieve continuous improvement through periodic reviews, and that they participate in crafting the standards, the indicators of excellence, and that the process of review is one of collegiality, that is, academic experts from member institutions accrediting peer institutions. At the core of PAASCU's mandate is to uphold quality, and by quality, it has a fourfold definition. It means first the compliance to the government's minimum standards as defined by the Commission on Higher Education Memorandum Orders. These orders contains the policies, standards, and guidelines for every program offered in the country. But PAASCU's task is more than ensuring compliance to government standards. PAASCU audit not only this, but goes beyond what we call evidence-based excellence in learning outcomes, the institution's achievement of its unique vision, mission, and goals, fit for purpose, and how the school responds to the requirements of its stakeholders. This quality definition will help us navigate through these challenging times. At present, it accredits 53 programs from basic education to postgraduate education. Its member schools is 354 institutions, and we have accredited more than 1,500 programs. All our assessors are volunteers. These are experts from our peer institutions, 997 of them. Next slide, please. But PAASCU is not the sole accrediting agency in the Philippines. No? There are actually 5. No? 3 are federated and 2 have their own network. All of these are under the Commission on Higher Education. Next slide, please. A profile of the higher education system in the Philippines. No? There are a total of 2,393 higher education institutions in the Philippines, no? The highest number in Southeast Asia. For example, it has more than 4 times as many HEIs than Vietnam, a country with a similar size population. 28% of our public schools, which are classified as state universities and colleges, local universities and colleges, and those that provide training related to public services, such as the military academy. 72% are private schools, which are either religiously affiliated institutions and non-sectarian institutions. Many private higher educations are demand-absorbing institutions that fill a gap in supply by the massification of education in the country. In terms of enrollment, 3.2 million out of the 109 to 110 population are enrolled in the higher educational system. Enrollment levels at public institutions remain substantial, 47%, considering a large number of private HEIs. As to accreditation, only 30% of higher educational institutions have accreditation status, enjoying autonomous or deregulated status. The rest, though they have complied with the minimum standards set by government, is in a way also accredited by CHE. Next slide, please. If you will observe from 2016 to 2017, there was a dramatic decrease in enrollment to private schools. This is because of the 2013 K-12 reform that adds 2 years of senior high school to basic education, leading to no enrollment for the first and second years of college in those 2 periods. Also, the 2017 universal access to higher education, where enrollment in public HEIs is made free, led to a mass exodus of students from private to public universities and colleges. Next slide, please. These challenges faced by private schools were aggravated by the current pandemic. This is a stark picture, a news that was released a few days ago about what's happening to private schools in the country. Okay? The Council for Private Education Association in the Philippines conducted a survey of 500 schools. 80% of these schools are on the verge of closure. And around 370 private school teachers have also taken pay cuts or have undergone furlough status since the pandemic started. Next slide, please. But what is good, in a way, is CHED's response to this pandemic. In its guidelines on the implementation of flexible learning, which was publicly released for consultation a few weeks ago, it stated that the Herculean challenge then was how to continue teaching and learning beyond the usual face-to-face instruction. Thus, it has become an urgent need to explore other innovative learning modalities that will facilitate migration from traditional to flexible teaching and learning option. A customization of delivery modes responsive to students' needs for access to quality education. However, this is where EQAA will come in. Those who opt distance education providers in the ensuing academic year shall be evaluated based on the requirements, laws, policies, and procedures of the Commission and that of the state. This includes the role of the accrediting private agencies to support government in this effort. Next slide. Okay. Actually, I would like to show the challenges and opportunities are one, so I will not distinguish one with the other. Next slide, please. So first is the paradigm shift. QA bodies should understand that QA initiatives should cover all learning modalities, including online and distance education. This is, of course, compelled by the current pandemic. QA standards should remain rigorous, yet relevant and meaningful. Our processes should have the same elements, the submission of the SAR, the on-site visit, the report, a appeal process, a continuous review, but it should be made more flexible and responsive. Next slide, please. The extensive use of online infrastructure, tools, and methods to conduct the accreditation activities. And of course, high engagement with various stakeholders, particularly the school providers and the students in the whole process of change. Now let me focus on the standards. Next slide, please. I would like to qualify that the standards we need to develop are not only standards that pertain to e-learning provisions, but they should be standards that more or less capture what our schools are utilizing. That's why I would like to term it authentic standards. No? We have to review as a QA body our current standards and integrate provisions that will consider various modalities. This will, of course, include the alignment of our standards with current and coming government policies and guidelines on flexible learning. We have to continuously benchmark with best practices among our peer institutions, considering again that PAASCU is a peer organization. We also have to capture current practices, although not best, deployed by our institutions and challenge this towards quality standards. And we have to benchmark with regional and international standards like the one of ESGs. We have also to leverage on the effectiveness of the institution's IQA system. It is noteworthy to think that the EQA standards of ESG starts with building on the IQA system of the institution. We believe that the institution is primarily responsible for quality initiative, and we believe in a strong link between IQA and EQA initiative. This is also endorsed by the ACAF principles, which includes IQA as a component of the framework. Next slide, please. We have to ground all our standards, principles, criteria, and indicators on the four fundamental quality definition. Again, it should be relevant and meaningful. And finally, we have to formulate standards that are less prescriptive, but will allow for reflective and critical analysis of alignment of the school's practices with those standards. In relation to processes, next slide, please. We want to ensure that our processes are responsive and not restrictive. We have to provide flexibility in recognizing and supporting different and novel modalities of teaching and learning and related services. We have to advocate for the developmental thrust of accreditation. Yes, compliance with the minimum standards, but recognizing also and granting different levels of excellence or of accreditation on performance. We have to ensure, again, stakeholders' participation in the review process, particularly students. Next slide, please. We have to re-engineer the entire process of accreditation, particularly the review of the SAR and the conduct of the site visits. We have to field in new assessors who have experience and expertise in online and distance education and retool current assessors and staff representatives on new standards and accreditation protocols. We have to review training programs and paraphernalia and criteria for qualifications. And this process should be continuously reviewed. Next slide, please. In relation to technology, we have to smartly use technology and also use smart technologies in the process of accreditation. We have to integrate technology in the accreditation process, considering the capabilities of our member institutions. We have to upskill accreditors in assessing e-learning provision and in conducting accreditation with the use of technology. An example is to make mainstream practice online interviews and virtual meetings. Next slide, please. We have to promote compliance, though, with legal and ethical standards with the use of these technologies. We have to digitize as much as possible, not only our accreditation, but our processes in the Secretariat. In relation to the stakeholders, which I want to call the QA frontliners, we have to understand the challenges of our member schools, particularly the response to those challenges. Identify their needs, so hopefully we can help them, but also identify the best practices, which can also be basis for developing new standards on or distance education. We have to engage experts to revisit standards, revise instruments, and participate in survey visits. We have to tap member schools for the pilot testing of the revised standards and process and publicize the same. Next slide. We have to initiate activities for member schools to share our best practices. In fact, our initial plan in a meeting I attended a few days ago, we would like to convert our yearly General Assembly into a learning session. We have to ensure engagement of students, faculty, and support staff in the change process. So the conclusion is this. We want to have an inclusive paradigm in order to adapt to this challenge of e-education by, one, defining authentic standards, two, making our process responsive, three, utilizing technology to support our process, and finally, to be able to continuously engage our stakeholders in this development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Okay, we have heard what I would consider a good balanced menu of information description and also insight into experience down in on the ground in a QA body. And as usual, the QA part is actually the dessert element of the meal. And we are at the dessert element now. And this is the Q&A session, and we can, I will pose the questions to the speakers, and the participants have been quite active in listing a whole series of questions and observations about distance learning, e-learning, and maybe we can start with the question posed by Ban PT on AI and big data. Secretary, can you pass the question from the if you could flash the question, Johnson, that maybe I'll direct the question to you. This question is about can we use AI, machine learning, and big data to automate the data collection and reporting on the indicators that you were talking about? That's the first part of the question that was raised. And the second part is, how would you deal with academic integrity within these indicators? Because it is expected to be as large, if not a larger problem on the online domain.
Right. Thank you for the two questions. I think it's important to design an online system that we try to build in the data collection. Otherwise, the data collection and monitoring process will become a very tedious resource, consumed by the university. I think that had to be taken into consideration on machine learning and big data. For example, some of the information and data can be actually be collected when the student are performing certain tasks, for example, attendance, quizzes, and also in terms of interactivity, all this can be measured in terms of how motivated the student are in completing the assignment or completing a particular section of the course. So I think it's important for big data to be used to analyze the student behavior and how best the online teaching can be reviewed and redesigned to fit into different learning environment, and also in terms of different learning style, different ability of student. The second question is on academic integrity. I think that is a very serious matter to deal with. I think Esther have presented a set of tools that could be available to institutions to design and to build into the online teaching, where they can basically address authentic assessment. In Singapore, for example, there are numbers of cases of cheating in online learning. And some of the university, like the Singapore Management University, they have successfully implemented the use of artificial intelligence, trying to look at the posture or even the writing, the eye movement of the student, to detect any cheating or plagiarism of any kind. Yeah. So I think there are technology available today that could help us to ensure or reduce or minimize cheating. I think what is important is for university not to rely too heavily on examination, but to move on to more high-order thinking skill assessment, like project works or collaborative work. That are more on the ability of student performing it, rather than copying some answers or responses. So that could be a better way to avoid cheating, and it is also more authentic in assessing the student. Thank you. Maybe Esther would like to add on that academic integrity.
Yes, Esther's project on the Tesla project is aimed at ensuring reliable and robust system to assess, manage student assessment. Esther, if you can say something on the assessment part.
Yeah, that's right. I fully agree of what Mr. Johnson has already said. What we were working is not only on using instruments or technology. That's only a part in order to guarantee the integrity, the academic integrity. It was really important to design a proper assessment, to have a fully well-designed learning process, and it was also suggested to have more than one assessment. Let's say in a way that professor has more contact with the student and can follow which is the achievement of those learning outcomes. Talking about the technology side, it was suggested to work with more than one technology, because sometimes, well, cheating is possible. So if institutions work with or professor was using more than one technology, there will be more security.
Thank you. And I think the traditional classroom teaching has been there for decades, hundreds of years, and it's still not able to solve fully all the problems. So we should expect online will take a good amount of time also to sort out these problems online. Online is not a magic medium and everything will get solved, right? So it's just technology. And people who use the technology need to also participate in it using the values and ethics so that it will be a safe place to go. Okay, there was a question asked. Okay, there was a question asked by Goran from Anchor. What would be the three primary challenges in terms of the framework and also the standard that you talked about, Esther, for any institution? Of the many, of course, ideally it would be nice to actually look at the whole thing systematically and comprehensively. But what would be the three things if you think you can identify as the primary challenges that institutions will have to think about seriously as they move forward online? Esther, you want to start?
Okay, yeah.
Provide a concise response so that we can have time for a little bit more questions.
Okay, yeah. From my point of view, one of the most challenging one is to reflect the online education in the strategy of the institution. So the institution has to reflect what they want, which are the main objectives, and in this way, everything will goes on. So it is important to have a policy on e-learning. It is important to think about e-assessment, etc., and etc. But there are other elements that should be taken into account, and I would like to highlight also the pedagogical model. That's something important. The institution also reflect which is the model they want to follow and which is the most adequate for their profile. So I would like to highlight both of them. Of course, academic integrity is something really important too, because in this way it will have a more, a recognition, and it's a question of image also from the institution. So I would like to highlight three of them from this side.
Johnson, what would be the three primary challenges you think in terms of the framework?
In particularly, the faculty in terms of being familiar with the use of technology. Because if we were to look at U multi-rank statistic, only 1/3 of the courses are offered online. Or the other 2/3, the university are basically not well prepared for online learning. So I think it's important that we need to equip the faculty with the right tool, right support, and services for them to convert into online learning. Otherwise, in the long term, I don't think it will be sustainable if the faculty members are not trained in those areas. The second challenge would be the assessment, all right, which I think impose the most difficult areas to monitor, to ensure integrity, to ensure authenticity. So I think university need to find means how best can assessment be made online in fulfilling the learning outcome. The third areas could be the motivation part. If we were to look at how MOOCs, in terms of completion rates, is pretty low. Even with the recent study, the completion rate is still very, very low. So how can we motivate our students, especially in the self-regulated environment? How can we motivate them to continue to complete their program, their courses? It's not something that could be easy when you don't have a face-to-face interaction with the student, all right? Where the problem may not be surfaced so easily because you don't see them. Yeah. So I think these are the three areas that are probably very challenging for university.
Certainly, I think most academics would concur with you that they might be the problem and also the answer to many of the challenges that we face in the online media. Could I now ask a rather provocative question that was raised by Richard Garrett of EduVentures, and who's also a member of the Higher Education Observatory recently. He cautioned the QA bodies not to rush in too quickly with standards and norms into the experiment, because institutions are still experimenting. They are doing this form of teaching, and it is in many cases it appears that it will be temporary. So he cautioned that do not rush into this because you can stifle innovation. So on the one hand, we're talking about standards and norms to ensure that this is done in the right way, it is effective. And you have on the other side, you said, well, it's experimentation, it is innovation. So give them some space and time to find their feet before you start putting in standards and norms. So what do you say to Mr. Richard Garrett's caution to QA bodies? Esther?
Okay, well, I agree that we have to be calm when designing, but the first idea is that the standards and criteria frameworks should be the same independently on the way of delivery. So that's something that's the most important thing. So agencies, what we do when we are assessing, reviewing an institution or programs is guaranteeing that the students are going to acquire those learning outcomes, that promises that are providing the institutions. So I agree that we have to have we have to be flexible, and that's something that I have already said. agencies should be design procedures in a flexible way, but on the other side, we have to guarantee that things are done properly well and following the standards. So I think that agencies should be aware of this fact, should include some elements that reflect the online education, blended learning, etc. And obviously, there's something really important is that to explain to institutions which are the standards and how they have to organize, how they have to tackle with those issues. The dialogue is very important, and obviously methodologies are always designed jointly with them, so they've got a participation when we design a methodology. So in a way, they could give some feedback to agencies.
Okay, thank you, Esther. Rick, this is the question for you. The institutions have actually gone online to conduct remote teaching to continue with the teaching learning process for the students with all the associated challenges. But on the QA body side, certainly the pandemic has disrupted the business, at least for now. But going forward, how would the online modalities actually affect the work that your institution, the QA body that you are helming will do moving in future? You mentioned quickly virtual visits, more online and things like that. Are you ready? Are you prepared to transform the processes to adopt more online medium?
I'll dovetail my response to this with earlier question that was responded to by Esther. We cannot really rush the creation of standards nor the conduct of accreditation work to schools, particularly in the Philippines, who are still defining their teaching learning modalities. In fact, for example, for PAASCU, we have suspended accreditation visits for a year. And in a way, we have extended the validity of the accreditation status by a year. Why is that so? Because many of our schools will only open this August. And hopefully, before we can assess the quality of delivery, the quality of the teaching and learning, we have first to understand the adopted modality that they have adopted as a strategy. It's only in that way that we can refine our standards, so that we can rightfully assess the online distance modality that they have chosen. So I cannot give a direct response to that, except for the fact that there should be a constant understanding, constant dialogue with our member schools on how they are responding to the challenge of teaching. The problem in the Philippines is not just really to come up with a distance education thing. We have to understand also the situation of the students, because the modality of teaching will largely depend on the availability of devices to the students, and considering that not all of our students have access to devices, the internet connectivity in the country, and also the fluency of the students to navigate online tools. So to manage quality on this, I think requires first an understanding of the modality that will be used, and hopefully through conversations, through focus group discussions, and at the same time, by benchmarking with standards like the ESGs, or what should be, or even the opinion of experts. That's the time that we can identify qualities to assess the quality of these deliveries.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Let me pose another question on, this is a question that was since most institutions are likely to be doing both, continuing with face-to-face with more online as complementary or supplementary part of the teaching and learning strategy. Maybe a lot more now than before because they have rushed online, but they are also more comfortable now. Many of them have used it, so that is likely to be the scenario. So for the QA bodies, for the institutions, are we likely to look at two sets of standard or the standards being applied on two modalities of teaching and learning at the same time? So you're not talking about institutions that are exclusively online or doing distance learning versus the one that is face-to-face. More of the institutions in OECD countries and also in UK and elsewhere, in US and elsewhere, they're going to do both. So Judy Leighton of Chat asked this question. It's going to be a tough time for QA bodies because you are going into an institution and you be prepared to do both at the same time in one institution. So both in terms of time, resources, and SSS capability to understand both modalities and to come up with outcomes that are fair, objective, helpful. Is that moving forward? Do you see that as a challenge for QA bodies in terms of standard and the institutions that are, I use the word ambidextrous. They're going to look at both sides, online and offline at the same time?
Yeah, that's. I think that's the next future. So right now with the pandemic, many institutions are moving to blended learning, and I think that they will keep going on this, combining these modalities with face-to-face. So what quality assurance body should do is to have flexibility. So standards, criteria should be flexible in order to include both modes of delivery. But on the other side, this means more work. So maybe panels should review more things, how they are tackling with online learning and with face-to-face learning, because they should analyze more deeply how is the VLE or how they are designing the teaching and learning process when they are following a blended way, etc. But it is possible, because we are doing right now in our agency, in ACU Catalunya, we are assessing programs that are delivered in both ways using the same standards. In our system, we've got the tradition, we've got an open university there. So it was really useful for us to test the same criteria, but with some adaptations to e-learning, of course. And at the beginning, we've got some arguments that because this open university was asking for more specificities to online education, and that was right. So we have to adapt. Of course, it's a question of experience, but I would insist criteria and standards should be the same. Otherwise, we are going to provide a wrong message to the system. We are going to say that they are not the same if a student is following an online program or a face-to-face program. So that's something that it's not fair. So I would insist a lot. So standards, criteria should be the same with some adaptations to the particularities, with training to the experts that should know what they have to look at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Esther. I think most would, all in education would agree that the standards are common and they need to be interpreted for different modalities so that the final outcome or the value and eventually the recognition of the learning outcome from different modes and different medium are equivalent. And there are no questions about one being better than the other. They ought to be equivalent. I think most in quality education, quality assurance and higher education would subscribe to that. And since we are coming close to the time allotted for this webinar, I will maybe provide a little bit of summary and a closure to this session. This has been an interesting session talking about the quality standards that are already available, both the one that is ESG based in Europe or EU, and also the one that is that Johnson talked about under the ASEAN University Network framework that he talked about. This and within the nations, there are also many other distance learning and online learning frameworks. I'm sure in Indonesia and Malaysia and Philippines and Thailand and many other countries in this region, they have their own national version or variants of this framework. So the frameworks are already there. Now the challenge is to use this thoughtfully, intelligently, and also patiently to ensure that the online learning that we have rushed into and experimented with can actually become a transformational experience for higher education institutions to improve the quality of teaching and learning and access, and hopefully also excitement for the students and staff, because it's a new medium. So there's a lot of opportunity to try and experiment with many new things that's not possible earlier. So that's already available, and for institutions, this is a good place to start thinking seriously in terms of taking the next step. If I may, I like to quote something that Ibu Tian of Open University Indonesia said recently. The little virus managed to do something that governments, regulators, QA bodies, a lot of proponents of online distance learning could not do in the last 2-3 decades. It managed to get everybody online. So that threshold has already been crossed. Now we are at a point where now that we've crossed the threshold, how do we make sure that this experience actually continues and every institution is able to capitalize on this technology, not in a fashionable sense, but in a much more serious way, to make sure that the quality of education delivered is on par, if not better than what you can get in a face-to-face setting. Okay. On that note, I think the time is up. I want to thank all the 3 speakers for presentation and also dealing with the questions. And I think my time is up. Now I'll pass you back to, I think it's Darren. Darren, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hasman. And yeah, your closing remarks are so apt for the time we're in. I can say this is our first digital policy dialogue, and had the little virus not been around, I think we would have been sitting in a hotel room somewhere. The beauty of it is that we get to bring in a lot more perspectives and many other attendees who may not have been able to attend otherwise. So thank you very much for moderating this exceptionally interesting and timely session. I'd like to also thank Esther, Johnson, and Rick for your interesting and informative presentations and great responses to the questions. And also Sebastian for bringing us in to the session, and really for bringing the panel together over the last couple of weeks. This session then does bring us to an end of the Share Policy Dialogue 11 webinar series. It's been a very busy June for the Share team. We had great sessions. We hope you enjoyed the sessions. I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to all the moderators and the panelists who gave of their time and expertise in the sessions. I would like to also thank and sincerely thank the ever creative and committed Share team members who ensured the smooth running of the sessions in this, our first digital policy dialogue. I think it went very well, if I can say so. If you'd like to learn more about the Share program, please visit our website and social media platforms. And we look forward to seeing you again. And I think this will be an ongoing component of policy dialogues. We will have a digital component and be able to share aspects of what we do in supporting higher education in the ASEAN region. So thank you all once again. Please don't forget to fill out any feedback you may have for us. We look forward to keeping in touch with you all. Thank you again. Bye-bye.